A problem that I've noticed a lot in small indie games, especially game jam games, is that enemy placement seems to be completely random. This can be really annoying. Putting no thought into enemy placement can very easily result in way too many enemies, which will make the game way too hard. Or it can result in not enough enemies, which will make the game way too easy and probably really boring too. Of course, the amount of enemies needed differs from game to game. Some games don't need enemies at all. For example, look at my game Mirrored and Slimy Walls, they don't have any enemies. In contrast to that, some games need a lot of enemies. For example, my game, the game I'm talking about right now, Melodic Massacre. And that's because I want the game to have a fast pace. Every game type needs its own considerations on enemies. You need to decide what type of game you want to make and how hard you want the game to be. This is really important for your decisions for how to place enemies. Before I continue, I want to say that I'm far from a great game dev. So everything I talk about I learned from experimenting, so it might be really bad advice. I also made a Discord server for the channel. There are already some nice people in it, and if you also want to join, link will be down in the description. Alright, now let's continue. I started making new levels for my game Melodic Massacre. Before I started with this, I made some new enemies. I will only talk about 2 of those enemies because currently those are the only enemies that are in use. The first one is an enemy that is really tall and also pretty fast. It's slightly slower than the player at the default speed. But every 7 to 12 seconds the enemy starts to dash towards a player. This could be used to surprise the player, for example. It's a good thing to think about what an ability of an enemy can do to improve the gameplay. Just saying. The second enemy is almost exactly the same as the standard enemy. The only difference is that when you get hit by this enemy, your speed gets reduced. When I started placing enemies, I realized that this enemy could be really good in combination with another enemy I made before, and that enemy was pretty fast, but that's all. The idea behind this combination was that first the player would get hit by the enemy, and that slows the player, and then the faster enemies can damage the player because they are faster and the player can't get away because they are slow. This taught me something pretty valuable, I think. Putting enemies that are a good combination next to each other can make the enemy placement feel more thought out. This good combination can be created intentionally, but it always can happen on accident. And when you try to create a combination, it could also always fail. Also, when you introduce a new enemy, it should be in an organic way. Don't just straight up say, this enemy does this. Make the player figure it out on their own. That will make the player feel more smart, sort of. I know this sounds obvious to most people what I just said, but I just want to say it just to be sure. For my game I tried to create a flow that goes like this. A lot of enemies in a big area, so a big battle begins. Then the player gets a bit of rest from that battle. Then again a big battle in a big area. Then again, like you probably expected, rest for the player, and this goes on and on and on. This way the player won't get overwhelmed by big battle after big battle. I mean, it's always a possibility that they get overwhelmed, but it really depends on the players themselves. Every player is different, and you need to try to appeal to as many players as possible, so your game gets played the most as possible. I'm bad at talking sometimes. So it's a really bad idea to overwhelm the player with enemies. I mean, it's always a bad idea to overwhelm the player, but you get the idea. I just realized I haven't talked about how I do enemy placements for my game, really. And this video is supposed to be a devlog for Melodic Massacre. So let's get into that right now. Like I already said, I tried to create that flow that I was talking about. But when I first start placing enemies, there are always way too many enemies. So there isn't really a flow. It's practically always enemies attacking you. This is not a problem, of course. I can always remove those enemies when I feel like it. After I place the enemies, I start testing it over and over again. And between every test I remove or add enemies, which makes the game feel better. I continue this process over and over again until I feel like the difficulty is just right. I get this wrong a lot though, so people playtesting my game always helps. It always helps. For example, people thought that the levels in the demo, link down in the description, were way too hard. Because of this, I added a health pickup that the enemies randomly drop when you defeat that enemy, and when you grab that pickup, it restores 1 health. This made the game a lot easier and better in my opinion. It's still hard, but it's more accessible to more people. That is just my goal, and it should be every game dev's goal to make your game accessible to the most people as possible. But yeah, I don't want to make this video too long, so here's just a bit of footage of the level that I made. Alright, I think I talked about everything that is of note, so nothing really big or important that I added. So if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, that would make me really happy. And again, you can join my Discord server with the link down in the description. But for now, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time, hopefully. Bye!